They poured the foundation while I was out of town. That's how this whole mess started. I'd left for a few days to go trout fishing with an old buddy up near the state line. No cell service, no noise, just river pine trees and the kind of peace you can only find when you're far from the world. But when I came back, concrete. Right where my driveway used to be. Not cracked concrete, not some temporary barrier. No, this was a full, freshly poured foundation with steel rebar sticking up like ribs in the air. And it was sitting right across the only road that leads to my house. Let me set the scene for you. I own 8 acres in western North Carolina, about 20 minutes outside of town. Most people don't even know exists unless they're passing through on their way to Asheville. It's mostly pine trees and hardwood, a long stretch of land that opens up into a clearing where my cabin sits. I bought it in 2010 after my divorce. Back then I needed quiet. The land gave me that. There's one driveway, it comes off the county road, winds about 300 feet through the trees and gets me to my front porch. It's nothing fancy, just gravel packed tight, but I maintain it myself. Every spring I spread fresh stone and every fall I clear the leaves. After storms you'll find me out there with a chainsaw cutting up fallen limbs. It's not just a road. It's my access, the only way in and out. Without it I wouldn't be able to live there. When I bought the property I had a survey done. Everything was crystal clear. That driveway, it sits squarely inside my boundary lines. No easements, no shared access, clean and simple. For years, no one questioned it. Then the Millers moved in. Scott and Leah Miller, let's call them that. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. He worked in tech, a remote job, and she ran some branding agency out of Charlotte. They bought the 5-acre parcel next to me, the one that had been vacant for years. I remember the first time I met Scott. I was dragging branches off my driveway after a summer thunderstorm. He pulled up in a shiny black SUV, rolled down his window, and flashed me a big friendly smile. "Hey neighbor," he said. "Just closed on the place next door. We're building a modern farmhouse. Figured we'd introduce ourselves." "Modern farmhouse, huh?" I shook his hand. "Welcome to the woods," I said. He asked about the area, the internet service, how bad the winters were. I told him what I tell everyone, it's quiet, it's slow, and it's not for everybody. He laughed and said, "That's exactly why we bought it. We need an escape from the city chaos." I didn't think much of it at the time, but he did glance down my driveway while we were talking. A long look. Construction started about a month later, clearing trees, bringing in equipment, big trucks rumbling down the county road. I didn't mind. I've got nothing against development as long as it stays where it belongs. 6 weeks later, I left for that fishing trip. When I came back, I turned off the county road like I had 1,000 times before. I eased into my driveway, drove maybe 50 feet, and that's when I saw it. Gray concrete stretching across the width of my driveway. The forms were still bolted to the sides, and rebar was rising in neat vertical lines. A garage foundation right on top of my road. I sat there in my truck engine idling. For a moment, my brain couldn't make sense of it. Maybe they were staging materials. Maybe it was just a temporary setup. Then I realized, no, this was permanent. They'd poured a foundation on my land. I got out of the truck, walked up to it, ran my hand over the edge, still rough from the pour, no gap, no way around it. On both sides of the driveway, thick woods and a steep drop toward a creek. There was no way to swing wide and drive around unless you wanted to flip your vehicle. I pulled out my phone and called Scott. He answered on the second ring, cheerful as ever. "Hey man, what's up?" I said, Is that a garage foundation blocking my driveway?" There was silence for a beat. Then, "Oh yeah, we thought that strip was part of our lot." I said, "No, it's not. I've got a survey. That driveway is entirely on my property." He exhaled slowly like I was the one being difficult. "Our builder measured from the road. The county map shows a different line than what you're describing." "The county map is not a survey," I said. "You can't just build over someone's access because a website looks different." Another pause, then he said something that still rings in my ears. "Look, even if it's a little over, we're already this far in. You can just come around through the trees for now. We'll figure it out later." "Come around through the trees," I said, heat rising in my chest. "That's my only access. You need to stop construction immediately." His tone shifted, hardening. "Our contractor says we're within our boundary. If you think otherwise, you can talk to a lawyer." And just like that, neighborly smiles were gone. I hung up, stood there staring at that slab of concrete. It's a strange feeling seeing something permanent sitting where it has no right to be. Concrete is confidence. It says we're not moving. I backed my truck out, parked it along the county road, and walked the rest of the way in through the woods, scratching my arms on branches, stepping over rocks, feeling like a trespasser on my own land. That walk, it did something to me. Up until that moment, I believed this was probably just a misunderstanding, maybe a measurement error, something that could be sorted out with a handshake. But as I pushed through the brush to reach my front porch, I realized something else. They poured that foundation while I was gone, and that didn't feel accidental. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was worried about losing the land. I had the paperwork. I had the survey stamped and sealed, recorded with the county. What kept me up was the feeling that someone had tested me, like they looked at the quiet guy in the woods and figured I wouldn't push back. By sunrise, I had already dug the survey out of my filing cabinet and spread it across my kitchen table. I traced the boundary line with my fingers, slow and deliberate. The driveway sat comfortably inside my property by a good 12 feet at its narrowest point. 12 feet isn't a rounding error. I called my attorney David Clean. I'd used him years ago when I refinanced the cabin. A good man local. Didn't wear flashy suits or throw around Latin words. David listened without interrupting while I explained everything. They poured a foundation across your only access point, he repeated. Yes, and construction is ongoing. Looks like it. Bring me your survey and any photos you have. Don't engage with them further until we talk. I drove into town that morning and parked along Main Street, walking into his office. There's something about a small-town law office, wood paneling, old framed maps on the walls, the faint smell of coffee and paper. David studied the survey for a long time, then pulled up the county GIS map on his computer. He leaned back in his chair. This is clean, he said. The driveway is yours entirely. They're well over the line. So what happens now? Now we send a formal demand. They remove the structure. If they refuse, we seek an injunction and an order for removal. David said it calmly, like he was discussing fence repair, not a concrete garage. We drafted the letter that afternoon. It gave them 10 days to cease construction and remove all encroachments. David insisted courts appreciate reasonableness, so the letter went out certified. 3 days later, I heard it again, the hammering, the compressors. I drove down the county road and parked, watching as their crew continued building on top of that foundation. Studs were going up, walls were taking shape. I walked over. Scott was there, hands on hips, looking proud like a dad at a Little League game. Did you get the letter? I asked. Yeah, he said, barely looking at me. Our attorney is reviewing it. So why are you still building on my property? He finally turned toward me. Because until a judge tells us to stop, we're proceeding under the assumption our builder was correct. Your builder was not correct, I said. That's your opinion. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was that short, disbelieving laugh you let out when someone says something so detached from reality. You almost admire the confidence. You're building a permanent structure across my only access, I said. You understand how insane that sounds, right? He shrugged. You're blowing this out of proportion. We're talking about a strip of gravel. We can work out an easement. There it was, an easement. He wanted legal permission to keep his garage where my driveway sat, which meant I'd have to give up control of my own access point. We could compensate you for the inconvenience, he said. Inconvenience. I looked past him at the frame of the garage rising from the slab. This wasn't a mistake. This was a strategy. Pour fast, build fast, make it expensive to undo, then pressure the quiet neighbor into settling. You poured that foundation while I was out of town, I said. His expression flickered just slightly. Timing worked out that way, right? I left before I said something I'd regret. 2 days later, David called me back. The Millers had retained a large firm from Charlotte. The response letter was 4 pages long, full of confident language about reliance on contractor measurements and ambiguities in mapping data. They proposed negotiating a formal shared access agreement, which would allow them to keep the garage where it stood in exchange for financial compensation. David slid the letter across the desk. They're trying to corner you, he said. They think if they keep building, you won't want to deal with the headache of tearing it down. So what do? We file for immediate injunctive relief. The hearing was set 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the garage became a full structure, sheathing roof trusses, even a partial shingle job. It looked almost finished from the outside. Every nail they drove felt like a challenge. Neighbors started talking. Word travels fast in a small town. One evening, my closest neighbor, Harold, stopped by. I've been here 40 years, he said, leaning on my porch railing. I've seen boundary disputes, but I've never seen someone build first and argue later. I didn't know whether to feel validated or exhausted. The day of the hearing arrived gray and humid. The courtroom was small wooden benches, fans turning slowly overhead. The Millers sat across the aisle with their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in a tailored suit who seemed mildly irritated to be in a rural courthouse. Scott avoided my eyes. David stood up and laid out the facts simply. The recorded survey boundary photographs and the structure blocking my only access. The judge, a middle-aged man named Judge Harper, asked one question. Does the defendant dispute the accuracy of the recorded survey? Their attorney shifted. We believe there may be discrepancies. The judge held up his hand. Do you have a competing survey? No, Your Honor. Then the recorded survey stands. That was it. The judge reviewed the photos again and looked directly at Scott and Leah. You built a permanent structure that encroaches on your neighbor's property and obstructs his access. That is not a minor inconvenience, the judge said. That is a substantial interference with property rights. The courtroom was silent. I'm ordering the defendants to remove the encroaching structure in its entirety within 14 days. If they fail to do so, the plaintiff is authorized to arrange removal and seek recovery of all associated costs. 14 days. Outside the courthouse, Scott finally looked at me. You really want to do this? He asked, voice tight. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him the same way I had looked at that slab of concrete weeks earlier. I didn't start this, I said quietly. I just want my driveway back. The 14 days passed. The garage remained. On the 15th morning, I made a phone call. Tony Ramirez owns a small excavation company about 10 miles from me. He's a good operator, honest. The kind of guy who shows up early and doesn't waste words. You still got that excavator available, I asked. For what kind of job? Structure removal. Pause. Is this the one we talked about? Yeah, you got paperwork. Port order signed and stamped. Another pause. All right, I'll bring the 320. We'll need a dump trailer and a couple of laborers. We notified the sheriff's department the day before. Not because I expected violence, but because when money and ego collide, people get unpredictable. The deputy I spoke to sounded almost bored. As long as you have the order, you're within your rights, he said. We'll have a unit swing by. That morning, the sky was clear, almost blue in a way that felt disrespectful given the tension in my chest. Tony's crew rolled in just after 8, diesel engines growling, hydraulic arms clanking into position. Scott's house was quiet at first, curtains drawn, no movement. I stood beside David, who had come to document the process. He had a folder under his arm and a look on his face that said he had seen enough human stubbornness for one lifetime. You ready? He asked. No, I said, but I'm done waiting. Tony climbed into the cab of the excavator. The machine rumbled to life. For a second, everything felt suspended, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then the bucket came down. It hit the sidewall of the garage with a crack that echoed through the trees. Wood splintered. Nails screamed as they tore loose. The wall folded inward like it had been made of 2x4s. That was when Scott came running out of his house. What the hell do you think you're doing? He shouted, jogging toward us, phone in his hand. I didn't move. I handed him a copy of the order. You had 14 days, I said. You can't just destroy someone's property. The deputy's cruiser rolled up slowly behind him, tires crunching on gravel. The deputy stepped out, calm as could be. Sir, he said to Scott, the court authorized this action. Scott looked from me to the deputy to the excavator, which had already taken down a second section of wall. The roof sagged, then collapsed inward in a burst of dust and shingles. Leah appeared behind him, arms wrapped around herself, eyes wide. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. This didn't have to happen, Scott said, voice cracking. You tried to work something out, I replied, by building first and negotiating later. Tony maneuvered the excavator with surgical precision. He broke apart the framing, peeled back the roof, then turned his attention to the concrete slab. The sound of concrete cracking under hydraulic pressure is something you don't forget. It's deep. Final rebar twisted and snapped as the bucket pried chunks of foundation out of the earth. Each piece loaded into the dump trailer felt like another layer of tension lifting off my shoulders. It took less than 6 hours. By mid-afternoon, the driveway was clear. Scarred, yes. Ruts from heavy equipment, broken gravel pushed aside but open. I walked down the length of it slowly once the crew packed up. The pine trees stood quiet like they had been holding their breath too. For the first time in weeks, I could drive straight from the county road to my front porch without stepping through brush. Scott didn't speak to me again that day. 2 weeks later, I was served with papers. He was suing me for $18,000 in alleged construction losses, claiming wrongful destruction of property and emotional distress. Emotional distress. David barely raised an eyebrow when I brought the documents to his office. He's flailing, he said. The hearing on that claim lasted maybe 20 minutes. The judge reviewed his own prior order, looked at Scott, and asked a simple question. Did you comply with the removal deadline? No, Your Honor. Then you assumed the risk of loss. Case dismissed. Not only dismissed, but the judge ordered Scott to reimburse my legal fees and pay an additional $3,500 for damage their construction equipment had caused to my tree line and drainage ditch. When we walked out of that courthouse the second time, Scott didn't look angry anymore. He looked smaller. That might sound cruel. I didn't mean it that way. I just mean the confidence was gone. The certainty that money and momentum could bend reality in his favor had drained out of him. Over the next few months, they finished their house, adjusted their plans, moved the garage footprint fully onto their land. We didn't speak. We nodded occasionally like strangers passing each other on the road. I repaired my driveway myself, laid down fresh gravel, reseeded the shoulder where the excavator had torn up dirt, planted new saplings where trees had been damaged. Life returned to its rhythm. But something in me had shifted. Before all this, I believed most conflicts were misunderstandings. That if you explained yourself calmly enough, people would meet you halfway. Now I understand something different. Some people test boundaries not because they're confused, but because they're calculating. They assume you'll fold to avoid conflict. They assume you'll accept inconvenience to keep the peace. And sometimes, maybe most of the time, they're right. I think about that first conversation with Scott, when he said we could work out an easement, compensate me for the inconvenience. I wonder if in his mind he truly believed he was being reasonable. Maybe from where he stood it was just business, just numbers on paper. But to me it was never about money. It was about the simple idea that if you buy land, maintain it, pay taxes on it, and respect your neighbors, you shouldn't have to fight to keep access to your own front door. People sometimes ask if I regret not settling. Honestly, no, not because I enjoyed the fight. I didn't. There were weeks I felt drained, distracted, angry in a way I'm not proud of. But if I had backed down, that garage would still be sitting across my driveway. A daily reminder that I let someone push past a clear line. Now, when I turn off of the county road and drive that 300 feet through the trees, I feel something different than before. Not just peace, ownership.